Hello everyone, it's Chris here. Welcome back. Hope you're still enjoying your holiday. I presume you are on your yearly break because this is January. Actually, it's June now, but by the time you see here, it's January. Yeah, we're a bit ahead, but that's a good thing too, you know. Got other things to do as well. Anyway, I want to speak to you about a book today called Codename Green 41. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I called that book Green 41, but it actually refers to a plant operation. I don't know if it actually took place or not, but it certainly could have. And I later heard that some parts of it anyway did happen. Now, basically, the question we want to answer in this book is it possible for you to flood an army if you're now like from the other side and you want to cause mischief? Is it possible to drug an army? Is it possible to flood them with hardcore drugs? And I consider any drugs which does not have a doctor's signature on it or which is restricted use as hardcore, just to be sure. I look at it from a policeman viewpoint, which is why you know all these weed and dacha shops which you suddenly have in Thailand to me is a great irritation because wherever you walk, every 10 yards you'll find one of these weed cannabis shops. And they're not supposed to smoke their crap where you can smell it, but of course they do. Now, that's the one thing about our guest house is there's a total no smoking rule. Not on the balconies, not on the courtyard, not in the gardens, not in your room, never, ever. You smoke anywhere in our place, we chase you out. Um, and that's just fair game as far as I'm concerned. So I don't want to smell your shite. Really, I don't. It's the same with cigarette smoke. It's to me, it's not good for your health. It's actually very bad. And of course, the moment the Thai government opened the door, that devil came out, and now they're struggling. They're struggling to get it under control, and they won't. They won't. They'll never do it. And just today, they proclaimed a new law and regulations to say yes, you can buy it, but you need a medical certificate. So of course, you're just going to forge one. Also, we got some people coming here, which is really not the type of tourist you want. You know, they come here for other things than the beach and the oceans. They come here for, yeah, may I say that three little word which was almost banned in apartheid South Africa. They come here for sex and they come here to have a good time. But you know what? That's Patong Beach, man. It's like Gilbrow, everything goes. Um, and that's just the way it is. That's the way of life these days. So you can definitely, in the time which I've been here in Thailand, I've seen the difference with this recreational, it was roll our eyes, drug use has actually made. And yeah, it brings in a lot of money to the government. There's no doubt about it. And there's a lot of syndicates who are getting very, very rich out of it. But from a social viewpoint, I just don't see this working out. But anyway, the question was which we wanted to answer in this book is it possible to drug an army? And we look at Vietnam as a case study inside the books. Now, remember when I always say to you, and if you've listened to previous videos, what I'm saying now to you is boring. And yes, you know this. I'm aware of that. I just move the camera a little bit closer. I'm aware that it's probably boring to you, but there might be new people here, and if so, you're welcome, and I'm happy to have you here. Um, Whenever the characters start discussing something in my books, you can take for granted it is well researched and is based upon fact. So it is not just talking. You can quickly, if you're clever enough, you will quickly understand this is a message coming to you. These are giving you statistics which you actually need or good to know about. Because there is in Vietnam, sadly so, there's a perception that most of the Vietnam veterans are actually bunch of druggies, you know, and they just caused trouble and they became part of an anti-war movement and things like that. In fact, the truth is completely different. The Vietnam soldiers and those who went, most of them actually did better than the hippies who stayed behind or ran to Canada, you know. And they also, a lot of them were exposed to drugs. That's true. About 55% of them said they were exposed to, especially weed, cannabis, marijuana, that's how you say it, dacha, Indian hennep, all of these things. And they did use it now and then, but that depended on where you were. If you were out on the field, it was not that easy to get hold of drugs. But if you were stationed, say, in Saigon, or you were attending golf courses or whatever, some of them were doing, or you were there in the cities visiting the brothels and these places, then of course, yes, you would find a whole bunch of heroin type of addicts right there. But the problem with an addict is like gay and lesbian and what do we call them? LGBTQIZ, PE, whatever, I don't know. Is that you'll always find a minority of the population who will do that type of thing for whatever reason. And it's interesting in this book, it came out too, that when Billy Goat Clinton, when they came out with a don't ask and don't tell about gays serving in the military and lesbians, a lot of them actually just went underground, which they always were, and then it came out into the open. But the statistics will show you that there's actually a lot more of them who did not declare themselves to have these ways of doing things in a bedroom. And that is a major counterintelligence problem. I'm talking specifically US Army now, but you can put it across NATO. You know my views on NATO. It's not impressed with them, and I'm not impressed with them. It's based upon facts. It's what I've seen. And it's also about the reports we read about them in Afghanistan and Iraq. Most of the contractors actually were reporting back to headquarters. Most of them would have tea afterwards, and most of them actually accepted money to act as informants. Don't they still do? Which meant that they were right there where they could actually observe this brilliant militaries, and I'm sarcastic. And they might be good at certain things. Look, there's no doubt that there's a lot of warriors inside the US and NATO militaries, good people, fighting men. But overall, I'm looking at the overall picture. There's nothing impressive about them or their weapons. It's just a lot of money involved. That's my opinion, guys. I know many of you will disagree. Whatever, it doesn't matter. It's good to disagree sometimes. But even there, the drug use was out of control, totally. And I have a bunch of statistics, so let me look at my notes. I made some notes here. I even had to buy a new computer, ink cartridges for the, what do you call it, the printer. Because, if I print only 5 or 10 pages per book, it means I'm printing about 600-700 pages just to make notes. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. Well, anyway, let's look at the statistics of Vietnam. Now, the first thing is, you will remember, I remember in the 80s, there was a song called 19, remembered by Paul Hardcastle. Many of you will remember it. I remember it. It was a fairly good song, not bad. It just flashes back of Vietnam. When it came out in 1985, of course, it was 10 years after the fall of Saigon. In fact, because the CIA left their files behind, like they always do when they run away. That's what they do. Never get involved with the CIA. They will betray you. They will betray you. There's no doubt about it. They will betray you. Then they left their files behind, and of course the communists and the North Vietnamese intelligence officers went through it. They handed them over to the Russians and Chinese as well, by the way, just saying. And then a lot of these people actually ended up in camps of re-education, and by 1985 they were still there. Yeah, they were still there. I only got out at about 1995, around about there. And most of them, of course, died. So the Americans now were trying to cover up, they were trying now to start with the Rambo movies and, trying to make sure that the world actually understands that they won the war. Now, this is a funny thing because they did actually win the war. Um, when Saigon fell, the US were not there anymore. They were out. They were out for about 3 years already. So that's a one way of looking at it. And if you look at it from that way, then Russia or the Soviet Union didn't lose in Afghanistan either, because they stabilized the country, they moved back, and 3 years later the Taliban came in and took over, which of course had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11, nothing whatsoever. That's bullshit. But whatever. But there's other people who will say that, same with us, who will say, yeah, okay, guys, you won the battles mostly. In fact, we won virtually all of it, unlike Vietnam, where the US did see their asses quite a few times. But the enemy is still in control of your country. So from that viewpoint, of course, you lost. So again, it depends if you're looking at it from a tactical viewpoint or a strategic viewpoint. And also in those days of Vietnam, of course, the domino principle was going on. So they said that, look, if South Vietnam falls, then the next one is Thailand, and then Cambodia, and then India, and then it will just all collapse until it reaches the West proper. Therefore, we have to intervene, we have to stop it. That was the theory. I think it's Henry Kissinger, who, by the way, is very weird because he was a Knight of Malta. Yeah, all of them, huh? So that's the reason, and it's a failed concept. It turned out not to be true. I mean, South Vietnam did fall, and the rest of the countries did not fall, except for Laos. Laos became communist and still is. I actually went to Laos because we had to leave Thailand right when we arrived. We could stay for a few months, and we had to leave, reapply for a visa, and then come back. So we went to Laos, and that was one of the weirdest things in my life. You still see the people dressed there exactly as they would have been under the communist regime in the 1940s, 50s. And it's a weird country too, because where you go in Thailand mostly, and other countries around us, people are happy. They're smiling, they're busy, they're happy, man. But in Laos, you can definitely see the communist regime. They're not happy. They don't look happy. They're very withdrawn. They don't really trust you. But nevertheless, I got a wonderful knife, which I bought for about 2 million Lao money. Don't know exactly what you call it. But it came down to about $20. And funny enough, I mentioned Rambo just now. This is the actual knife which the Rambo knife came from. So it's one of those. Perhaps I should fetch it and just show it to you quickly. Yeah, I'll do that. Why not? Yeah, it's a bit of a weird thing. We were in a shop in a empty, half empty shopping mall, which was also a bit weird. And as we were walking around, I saw they had like a second-hand section, and I stopped to look, and I found this knife, and here it is. You can see it is substantial. It's not trick photography or anything here. This is a big knife. You have your parachute cord here on it. You can unscrew it here at the back. Exactly like the Rambo knives. I'm not a knife fighter. I'm not from the Cape Flats. But anyway, inside you still had the original survival things. And it actually still had its survival rations and things inside it, but I'm not sure that you can actually use it. And then it's not a good fighting knife at all, but for a jungle, it's actually good. And it is called the Jungle King. You can see it's written on a Jungle King 1. You have his edges here, which is quite sharp. The entire knife is quite sharp. It's a good knife. It's a really great knife for the jungle. But whether it's not that good as a killing knife. It's not a Sykes-Fairbairn. So you have that, and then you also have something inside. And I don't have all the parts, but in it you have another little knife. It comes out from this thing which just slides into the, I don't even know what you call this in English, holster, I suppose. And you have a sharper knife with lots of things on it. You see, you can open the old beer can from this side. You can just hold it. You can cut wire from this side, for the explosives if you need to take the, to get to the electricity wires and remove a plastic coating. So we have that, and even here we have like something you can draw lines with or make measurements, things like that, and then the knife just goes back again, and then it goes down like inside, it goes in like this. And here you have the entire paracord, and if you unwind it, you'll find, what do you call it, which you can sharpen the knife upon, would be inside, and here you have like a slingshot. So it even had like rubber bands, so you could put the rubber bands here and just use it as a slingshot. It's really a very good knife, and I'm really glad I got it for almost nothing. It's part of my collection, yeah. I'm not a knife collector in any sense of the word. When I looked at the knife and I thought to myself, I wonder what's your history. I wonder exactly how it went with you. How did you get here? How did you end up here? Blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I'm quite happy with my knife. But since we're talking about that, because we're quite close to China, we can get amazing things. You wouldn't believe us. This is about 150 rands. And I got it for gifts for people who actually come onto Legacy. And if you open it, it's like a complete survival pack. You have your blanket, and then you have like something to break windows with, as well as to write. You have a compass. You've got a torch. There's actually walking compass. You've got saws, fire makers that you can make fire with. All these things and a lot more things inside here. It's absolutely amazing which I have in it. This is a whistle which you can call for help. Yeah, we give out these gift packs to people who actually come to the studio to be recorded. So, not a bribe, just it's not really money. There's even wire saws and things inside it. It's just nice. So anyway, let's get back to the book, the Green 41. We were speaking about the song of 19. Now, in fact, the average age of a Vietnam soldier was not 19. In fact, it was 26. And I said also they were bringing out all the movies and things because they were now trying to create the illusion that they were actually winning, which I said to you, they actually were, depending on how you look at it. But suddenly there was a counter movement to the anti-war movement, and they became patriotic again under Mr. Reagan. And the Vietnam vets, and I know many of them, started being treated a little bit better. Because up to then, they said to me if they would go to the Veterans Hospital, the VA hospitals, it seems like the Second World War guys were getting very old by then, was the ones who were treated very well, because, they fought Hitler. And they defeated Hitler. Yeah, you didn't live in a damn dream world, man. But they did defeat Japan. But they couldn't get Japan to actually surrender. Atomic weapons, which they dropped, well, it played a role, no doubt about it. But it was actually the invasion of Russia, the Soviet Union, who overran Manchuria, I believe. And also what the entire China, basically, I think it was called August Wind in 1945, where they had a couple of million people, and they just overcome the Japanese army there. They just defeated them in the largest and best blitzkrieg you've never heard about. But the Vietnam vet said to me that up to then they were really treated badly. They were not welcomed. They were called baby killers. They just went basically and they started just carry on with their life. So, we have a lot of sympathy because it was basically us as well. When we came back, most people didn't want to know about us, couldn't care less. But I see these days, it's now 40 years later, I see there's a lot of military vet in South Africa and around the world. You find a lot of them now proud, wearing their berets, wearing their medals, wearing their parachute wings, having get-togethers, taking care of each other. That's fantastic to see. So if you haven't joined any of these groups, then please go and do so. Don't sit in your room and let people tell you you're worthless and you're rubbish and all such things. So anyway, back to the song of 19. Came out in 1985. It was very popular. I think it went #1 in 13 countries. I'm not aware of Paul Hardcastle making any other song worth listening to, but of course I might be wrong. But there were problems with this song because there's a guy called Mike Oldfield, and he had a song called Tubular Bells or something. I listened to it once. It's not my favorite, but I did listen to it. And that's, of course, the one which placed Richard Branson on the map. Richard Branson is this, I don't know if he's a billionaire, but he's a very rich man anyway. Virgin Records, that's his story. And then, of course, he started an airline. And Virgin America or something like that, Virgin Airlines, which I don't know if they exist anymore. I haven't heard of them for a long time. But anyway, this guy, Mike Oldfield, he went sued Hardcastle for copyright infringement because he says it's a copy of Tubular Bells. Don't know what happened there. I really don't know. And then there's another song which we mention in this book because it refers to Vietnam, but it actually had nothing to do with Vietnam. And that's a song, more a country western, which says, Ruby, don't take your love to town. Remember that song? I think it's Kenny Rogers, one of them, some of them songs sang that. But when it was first written in 1947, it had nothing to do with Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam wasn't even on the map then. It had nothing to do with it. Vietnam was nothing. So this was actually about a guy who fought in Europe and he got wounded. And then he came to Florida, Palm Beach County, which my late wife Melissa used to like very much, that county. She grew up in Florida, so yeah. When she spoke Southern, you couldn't understand a word what she's saying. And that is nothing when she started speaking like people who didn't look like her. That was quite funny, actually. So we agreed that she either speak French or she speaks proper English. Of course, an American can do that. And then I could actually understand what she was saying. But it's also so that most of your US Green Berets and Special Forces people actually do come from the southern part. They are dear, they're tougher than the northern people. But anyway, so he came back, he settled there at Palm Beach, and he got himself a Pommy wife. There's a lot of these marriages, you see them. They were actually troop ships taking all these young mothers with their babies over to America to start a new life. How did that work out for them? Not well. No. Statistics will tell you that a lot of them actually ended up in divorce. It's a wartime romance. I mean, sex plays a major role. You don't want to die a virgin. So you get this girl and she gets you and she doesn't want to do it until you're married. So you get married. And and some of the marriages, of course, worked, but a lot of them didn't. And this was one of those who didn't work. This guy was, apparently, by all accounts, was an asshole. And so he mistreated her, and like often happens, I saw that in the police as well. Whenever you have a husband saying, oh no, you like that guy and you're cheating. Well, yeah, go look at yourself. Yeah, hello. Yeah, your secretary. Yeah, I know. And it's also so that most men, this is also statistics, but I don't know how they can prove it because it's based upon, I suppose, people talking. That when they're busy with their wife doing what they should be doing, they actually think of someone else. Yeah, it's cheating, it's cheating. But anyway, so he accuses her of being unfaithful, things like that, and then she left him. And she was actually called Ruby. And then when the song actually came out, they added um, a new line there, and they said that it wasn't me that started that old crazy Asian war, but I was proud to go and do my patriotic job. So people then immediately thought, okay, this has to do with Vietnam. But in fact, it had nothing to do with Vietnam. It's just a little bit of background. Okay, so again, the question we want to answer in this book is it possible to get an army drugged up so much that it can't be effective anymore? Now, guys, I'm not talking about the malicious and terrorist groups and things you find in Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa and other places, because they're not real armies, are they? I'm talking here about a Western or a proper army. And is it possible? Well, they tried in Vietnam, but your problem here is that for the guys to be useless as soldiers, they need to be drugged all the time. And that's all. That's all. And there was actually such, we have heard rumors, this is where the operation actually comes from, the exercise. There was a drug lord who were actually trying the same thing with the South African forces on the SADC in one of the countries, not going to mention the name. They were basically trying to get the South African soldiers to be smoked out of their minds all the time. The problem there was, in the first place, it does not take a young soldier to get drunk or drugged quite easily because he's extremely fit. He doesn't have extra weight on him. So even 2-3 beers and a man goes down, you know. He's not a good candidate. He's not exposed to these things for many years, so that he built up something against it. But again, you will find people who will do this. I know in our time, I think we drank a bit too much. A lot too much, actually, I would say. But what that brings me to another thing, and I will get back to Vietnam and statistics, is that just after South Africa, Mr. Mandela took over, you suddenly had really a lot of books coming out. I'm not going to mention names. Most of you would know what books I'm talking about, and they were very anti. So these liberals started writing books, and then they went to the worst. You know, there were about 600,000 national servicemen who served. So they went to those who had a grudge. And then they started telling their shitty little stories about stealing drugs and then they would get high on it. You know, every single time I speak to a medical doctor or a medic on legacy, from 7 Medical Battalion, which is a special forces unit, to others, ops medics, normal medics, I speak to all of them. And I always ask them, if you notice this at Legacy, our main channel, I always say to them, now, doctor or so-and-so, can you tell me, is it possible to steal drugs from your medical kit and get away with it? And every one of them says, no, because it's not possible. We check those drugs. You sign for those drugs. Yeah, I suppose it's possible that in isolated cases you could have done something, but really that was not the norm. We were very, very strict with these things. So there went the entire bloody story. It was just bullshit from the beginning to the end. But those were the types of books, of course, which came out, and then they would accuse Kufut, the police unit, of utter cruelty. You know, they would shoot people and they would just bury them in a shallow grave. And then because of rigor mortis, you would actually walk patrol, and the next moment you see, oh, there's a row of head sticking out of the sand because Kufut was there. But now they buried these people, and now they're sitting upright, the corpses, and they're looking like this. If you know anything about death, you would know. First the body dies, becomes soft, unresponsive. Then rigor mortis would actually go in. Then it goes soft again because it's rotten. Chances of that happening is less than zero. It is fuck all, it doesn't exist. You live in a dream world. Yeah, you live in a dream world. But when I was speaking to the Kufut people about the 9 days of war and even the army, I was asking these questions. I asked, such things happen? No, of course not, because never happened. There you go. But the problem is, guys, is that these books are actually quite popular. Some of them sold almost 100,000 copies. I wonder how much of that money actually went to the little weaklings there who were talking about it. I wonder. Yeah, just wondering. So we had all these accusations against the army and the police and everybody else. And legacy, I have to say, even though we're so suppressed there, I mean, it's ridiculous how suppressed we are. Is still combating this. We still have a voice. Which is why I always say to you, if you think you have a story, or even if you don't have a story, come and tell us. Come and speak to us. Tell your story so that we can get the puzzle together. So anyway, that was our own story with drugs, and it's really bullshit. People that drink, that is true. And I'm sure that a few of them would smoke weed here and there because you got those people as well. And I know about it. We speak about it at Legacy, but it was not a concerted effort to try and screw up operational capacity and capability. That never happened. Never. So in Vietnam, our conclusion is also, but yeah, well, perhaps you should read the book to find out about the conclusion. I don't really want to give a book away to you, in the sense that I talk so much here and then you don't have to read the book or you don't want to read the book. Because there's a lot of other things inside the book as well. We do deal with a lot of things there. But there is one thing I want to bring to your attention, and that would be a U.S. Green Beret major with the name of Gene Grant. Now, Grant with a T, Grant. He was a career officer in Afghanistan. Then he got cashiered basically because he was caught living with his love of his life, a female, who was actually a Washington Post reporter, which is not good for security, man. And he was also using apparently alcohol legal painkillers. That's a problem. That's a problem we have with militaries these days, especially the US one is very overused. And it's the same man who gets deployed time after time. Especially the special forces, was to begin with not really high standards, it's low standards. Overall. They are good people indeed, very good people, but overall standards are not good enough, not high enough in my eyes. And so we get deployed, and then they start getting injuries. And then, so of course, they have to go to the medical doctor. The medical doctor would give him legal drugs. And then the legal drugs would be abused and be over-abused. In fact, in 2009, now I'm sure it's worse today, but in 2009, US military doctors wrote 3.8 million prescriptions for painkillers. Yeah. So you can see where this is heading. Since the war on terror, the legal drug use in the US military increased fourfold. Now, you can get hooked on legal drugs, You don't need to go to the illegal drugs. You can get drugged up by legal stuff. And one of the things they are sort of having a huge problem with is OxyContin and Vicodin and morphine. And they say the statistics is that no less than 11% of active duty soldiers misuse or abuse their prescription drugs. This includes drugs to lose weight, because half of them are overweight, they're fat. And then the other problem is Viagra. They have absolutely millions and millions of Viagra prescriptions. It's something I don't understand, guys. If you're a young man, it doesn't take much for you to show a desired effect, below the belt. It doesn't take long. I mean, really, you just need to think in a certain way and it's there. As I say, ever ready to go, right? So why they would need these type of things, I don't know. I laugh about it a little bit, but I suppose it's not funny. At all. So they have a drugs problem, especially in the elite units. Not always illegal drugs, but definitely drugs which is prescribed. which is being abused. And they don't talk about it, but they should be talking about it. There's lots of other examples in the book. Let me just quickly say again what the book is about. This is codenamed Green 41, because something happens in that book which is of great interest. It is the first book where Lucy actually appears. Now, you know, the character Lucy is the one with the sniper. She's female. She is an agent. She was captured by a warlord. In fact, the one they're hunting in this book. And they got him in the next book, codenamed Celery 50, where Lucy actually dealt with him. Why was I writing it like that? I wanted to bring to your attention what happens to an agent in Sub-Saharan Africa who gets caught. This is not Europe. And whatever you people think of your torture programs in the CIA and other places, you're amateurs. You know nothing. You don't understand torture until you've seen what happens in Africa. Really, if you go to a place like the Congo or Sierra Leone, other places, being cooked alive and eaten afterwards is not uncommon. Not uncommon. You cannot believe the torture which happens here. And if you're a female and you don't even need to be pretty, but Lucy is actually a very attractive woman in real life. Then you will be abused. You will be definitely abused in a sexual way. You'll be abused in ways which you cannot begin to imagine. So Lucy then escaped. And there were plans to rescue her, but the problem was they kept on moving her. Now, on the one hand, it was a good thing. If they keep on moving Lucy, there's more chances of people witnessing what's going on and reporting in. But it also makes operational planning a bit difficult. But there were teams standing by to actually go and get Lucy out in real life. But in the books, Lucy escaped by herself and she gets out, and then she ends up in let's call it a place of safety, because Lucy cannot cope. Even the real one is weird. She's weird, man. She would sit and stare at plants. She would talk to plants. She takes pictures because she's a trained photographer as well. She would lie on her stomach and she would take pictures of ants, and she would lie there for hours looking at it. And then she's just, you can see the scars are there, even though we accept her, we understand her, but she's not normal. But anyway, in this mission, it's the first time she appears. And, you know, there are three main characters in the books. One is Angelique Dawson, who has command. The other one is later her husband, Foxtrot. And his mate Peter Ndebele Geelslong was a superb operator. Now, immediately Foxtrot is suspicious of Lucy because he's heard the rumors and he doesn't think that she should be back in the field. Because if she's back in the field, she might crack and she might do something which is stupid. She might even go crazy and start shooting at them. And the problem with Lucy is she is one of the best shots in the world. She is fantastically good when she starts shooting. Even to this very day, there's not a lot of people, including myself, who can shoot with Lucy. If she takes out that rifle, it's the funniest thing to see. When you see Lucy with a child, or you see Lucy on the shooting range, that's where she comes to life. That's where she's actually happy. And she would then become a different person. She's like, man, she's in her element there. She's just like fantastic. And so you see her with a rifle and she starts shooting, and then the standards are so high that she would complain, you know, if she misses a target by less than half an inch at 400 meters, you know, heavy wind blowing, she would complain bitterly about it for 2-3 days. And then she'll go back and redo it and redo it and redo it. And yeah, you can read about Lucy in many books, but also Codenamed Butterfly, the sniper book, where we go deeply into snipers and counter snipers. That's actually available in South Africa, the Codenamed Butterfly. When you'll read a lot about the technical expertise of Lucy. Now, in this book, there are actually three teams combining up. There's the assassins, there's the which Lucy is part of. There's the egg breakers, and then there's Angelique and her people. Now, if you want to know the difference, have a look at Coat and Crocodile, where I explain the differences to you. But inside the book, I explain a little bit of it. In Crocodile, I actually go into more detail. And so Angelique decides that she's going to interdict this Draklord. She's going to cut his convoys. And how she's going to do that? Well, she found out, basically through Lucy, who infiltrated them until she got caught, is that they have convoys which runs out of Malawi. It would then go across Lake Nyasa, and then it would go into Mozambique, and then it would, by vehicles, go all the way to Zimbabwe, and then from Zimbabwe it would be escorted by their counterintelligence people. This is how that Baboon Mugabe was making his money. They would then escort them down, and then they would get them across into South Africa. That was one of their pipelines. The other pipelines they were using was in the other countries where the South Africans were deployed, where they actually had the entire network of people trying to almost give us drugs away for free to get the South Africans hooked. It was actually a terrorist attack on South Africa. It was definitely not just criminal, if you understand what I mean. It went across the line of just being criminal behavior. So the idea then is to interdict these trucks and take them out and then replace the people on them with their own operatives. And Lucy is involved there, and there's something happens, which I say in the books, is probably one of the bravest things I've ever seen in my life, where Lucy totally loses it. Because she recognized some of these people as being torturers, and she just, as Foxtrot fears, she actually loses it. She starts, she should not be in the field. And Foxtrot then confronts Angelique on why did she take her out of that institution and bring her into a field. And Angelique is saying, if I leave her in the institution, she's going to die. Lucy needs a reason to live, like so many of us. So many of us. We became despondent with our experiences, and then we needed a reason to live. Some found it in God. Some found it wherever, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you need to reach deep, and you need to look at yourself and to go forward. You know what I'm talking about. Most of you are veterans. So Lucy lives to kill. She wants to murder this fellow who tortured and abused her. And as I say in the next book, Coat and Celery 50, she actually gets hold of him, which is another story. Because Celery is not actually about Lucy's private venture of torture, but it has to do with labs in South Africa creating weapons of mass destruction. And the funny thing about that book is it was published, and a month later, suddenly there appears in the newspaper articles, yes, go and research, about the Mossad raid, which also happened in Celery 50, on some laboratory in sub-Saharan Africa who were making weapons of mass destruction, meaning biological warfare. Yeah, they had the country wrong, and they had a few other things wrong, but yeah, it was nice for me to be confirmed once again. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So anyway, something happened there with Lucy, and I don't want to spoil it to you to tell you, but that makes it the book worth reading by itself. It's a very long book, by the way. It's 500 pages. It's 494, close to 500. And the other thing of interest there for us is Angelique also decides that she wants to sabotage a barge on Lake Nyasa. In other words, she wants to sink a ship. And when you're special forces or you're special forces trained or you have access to special forces people, you can actually do that. And in fact, it did happen. Remember Rainbow Warrior? In New Zealand, when French spies, when they actually boarded this Greenpeace, what do you call it, ship, Rainbow Warrior, or they swam up to it and they placed limpet mines on it. or something, and it blew up. And some guy actually died because he was a photographer, one of his liberals, and he went down into a sinking ship to get his equipment out, and he got trapped and he died. And the French spies actually got caught. They were sentenced to jail. They served a few years, and the entire French intelligence service had an overhaul. No, they didn't. No. They just got better. But let me just say to you, Greenpeace idiots, let me just say something. Greenpeace, go and read Codename Wrangler, the Aircraft Rescue Hostage Rescue book. We discuss them in great detail because they are declared terrorist organizations in certain parts of the world. Why? Because that's exactly what Greenpeace is. And they also attacked in Portugal. They attacked a whaler fleet. Same story. They swam into a harbor and they placed limpet mines and they sank an entire whaler fleet. That's what they did. Yeah. No, guys, I don't like whale hunting. I don't like hunting in any form of a sense of a word. I don't even eat meat. I don't want to see animals killed. I have no regrets about killing people, but I can regret a few times where we had to actually execute animals because they were suffering. I don't regret it, but I don't like that type of thing. So in my heart, I admire what they're trying to do for animals. This is Greenpeace now. But there are certain rules and there's certain laws and there's certain lines. And when you start acting like a bloody terrorist and you start sinking ships and you start making a damn nuisance of yourself and you start throwing people with things and you just act like a damn hooligan, and then you go further on your climate change. Oh, please. Yeah, I think I'll put in again, I did it in another slide and it was quite popular, but I'll put another 2 slides in for you. No, 4 slides of climate change, which prediction, none of which came true. Nothing. There's not a single one which came true. It's all bullshit and it's all part of a Hegelian dialectic they're playing upon you. Do you realize what will happen if you take away all people or if you take away all animals? Do you realize what's the consequences of covering the sun? Idiot? Do you? No. As I said to you, we scientists are not that bright, actually, not at all. But I do understand in a way where they come from, because if you spend long enough at university, they do make you liberal. There's no doubt about it. I mean, you do start thinking like your professors, and most of your professors, 99%, are hippies, they are liberal types, so they try to influence people to think the way they think. And they succeed. With a young mind, you can actually succeed in that type of thing. But anyway, I'll put it here to you because it's just so much bullshit. So Greenpeace is a terrorist organization, by the way. Not because of what they want to do, but in the way they do it. And that's very important. So limpet mines on ships are nothing new. It obviously comes from a long time ago. We all know limpet mines. We know how to disarm them. We know how to arm them. We saw the videos on Legacy Conversations where they attacked at Operation Amazon, where they attacked the oil refineries in southern Angola. We do look at the other operations as well, where they attacked oil refineries in Luanda and other places. We look at that in other Codename books. We deal with them. Of course, the books were written before Legacy Conversations came into being, so there's a bit of prior knowledge, which I'm glad to say that the guys who were there, they actually confirmed it was already written in the books. Without knowing it, I say again to you, that people of Legacy don't really read the books. So they would talk totally from their own viewpoint, and I who wrote the books would know Yeah, no, this is confirmed. So I was right once again. So we did talk about that as well. But in this book, in Code Name Green 41, we actually do go into great detail on how you would actually do such an operation, how you would swim up to a barge or a ferry, place your limpet mines, swim back out again. And I also describe a reasonably secret way of detonating it, but I had permission to do that, so I don't feel bad about it. But it works on geographical location. Exactly how, I don't know. But I do reveal the method anyway. So basically, they wanted to sink this barge, and they want to sink it, of course, after it offloaded its cargo, which will be intercepted by Foxtrot and these people where something happened to Lucy. And yeah, that's the book. And then they again found out where the, let's call it, the final station is in Zimbabwe. And so they went over the border in the middle of the night and just blew it up. Yeah. The newspapers talk about a severe fire which broke out in one of the warehouses. Yeah. Mm. Well, it's true. A fire that broke out. But yeah, they didn't say what caused that fire. But anyway, you can go and look at it. There's also a very unique way how they're smuggling this crap of theirs over into South Africa, and how they discovered it and how they got hold of it. Don't want to give a book away completely to you guys. It's a great book to read. I don't think I have a copy anymore. Like all the books, I had copies here, but you know, people will arrive and they want to actually have a copy, and you would give him a copy. And yeah, but it's a great book. It's available in Kindle as well as in audio, as well as in softcover. It's not available in hardcover, simply because of a cover, the picture on the cover. I couldn't convert it into a hardcover format. And it is such a good cover that I don't want to change it. And that's why it's not available in hardcover at all. In the future, I might do it like that. It's really worth it to do it in hardcover. But it's very hard to change that the way it looks. But I really like it because if you look at the cover, you're going to find out something incredible. When Lucy was not captured yet and inside this warlord's organization, she actually started marking the vehicles, the convoy vehicles transporting the drugs. She started marking them with infrared. And being Lucy, because she wasn't all there even before she got captured, to be honest, she wouldn't just draw like a cross on it or just a splash with a infrared paint or no. She would draw an entire damn picture there, you know, like a whole thing which she explains in the books why she did that. Now, it could have been done differently. It could have been done also with electronic means, which was also done in the real one, in the real story. But I don't think I went into this book. We just focuses on Lucy's pictures which she drew on the vehicles she drew there. And you'll see that on the cover of a book. So that's it. That's my story. Code Name Green 41. I hope you enjoy it. It's a great book. Really nice read. Lots of other things happening there as well. I recall that Angelique suddenly wants a piano. Foxtrot has to go and fetch a piano for her. And of course, being Angelique, she wants a piano in perfect shape. And to get that piano from South Africa to Berlin, which is the OSA Martino, where the actual headquarters of that operations were. Yeah, that's another story and a half. But anyway, that's a book. God bless until we meet again.